Hello and welcome to this CNBC TV 18 budget special. With just 10 days left for the finance minister to present the union budget for FY 2022-23, all eyes are at this time. What is it that the government has in store for the people of the country, especially the taxpayers? Will the budget hike taxes or will it give some relief in these trying times when taxpayers have been facing inflated medical bills, inflated cost of living, and an impact of inflation? I'm Timsi Jaipuria, and this time we have to discuss with us. We are joined by Akhilesh Ranjan, former member of CBDT and advisor Pricewaterhouse and Co LLP, Rajeev Dimri, head of tax at KPMG in India, and Ved Jain, past president ICAI. A very warm welcome, gentlemen. Since taxpayers watch budget very closely, what is it that taxpayers can expect from the finance minister on 1st of February? Let me begin with you, Mr. Ranjan. What do you think can taxpayers genuinely expect, especially given the fiscal room and more importantly, noting that the government came up with a new tax regime and proposed to do away with exemptions?
Yes, thank you, Timsi, and glad to be here on this platform. Well, I think every taxpayer expects in these times of COVID and post-COVID to get some relief, to get something from the government, something to show that the government cares, and to ameliorate the problems that they have been facing all this time. So expectation all around is, of course, on something to do with tax rates, some reliefs for the salaried class. Overall, some more leeway for, and which can leave more money in the pockets of people and help them tide over this crisis. But the only thing is that this may be the expectation, but I don't know whether the government is really has the space to do anything about tax rates. You correctly mentioned about the fiscal space available. There is a lot of expenditure which is required to be incurred, and the government has to find that revenue. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch and see how the government balances these factors. On the one hand, the impact of COVID, which is extremely important, and which has left a large number of taxpayers wanting some sort of relief, and on the other, the compulsion of the government to stimulate the economy and keep going through greater expenditures, which will in turn need more revenue.
So do you think, is there any window available in the current tax regimes that are there, be it the old or the new regime in terms of the personal taxes?
Well, I personally don't think so. You see, there are about 6 crore people who file returns, individuals, let's say, and just about 1.5 crores or less than that actually pay taxes. So there is it's not a very big segment out there which is actually paying taxes. The large majority of people who are filing returns are reporting incomes to 5 lakhs and who are or claiming refunds. So a tax relief in terms of reduction in tax rates is not something which is really going to affect or impact people to such an extent. What is more important is to make procedures simpler, to sort out these problems on the tax portal that are still going on, to make compliance clear, and generally help the taxpayers to fulfill their obligations. I think that's where the government's efforts should be at the moment.
What about you, Mr. Dimri? What do you think corporate taxpayers can expect from the finance minister this time? What is their major ask?
Well, the list is long, but if I were to just distill a couple of important points, we are all aware, and it's all for us to see, the current continuing state of pandemic has disrupted the entire business world, to say the least.
Yes.
People are not in offices, the global supply chains, the local supply chains are disrupted, and different states, weekends, weekends, lockdowns, etc., are all part and parcel of the disruption. Yes, it is true that certain sectors have done well, but it is also true that certain sectors have been massively impacted in terms of lost sales, in terms of lost opportunities. If we go around the world, many governments around the world have done things for the corporate sector, not just for the people. Whether these are, paying part of the salary bills that happened in UK, or refund of taxes in US. So different governments have done creative things. In India, of course, through the packages that were announced for the larger public, were laudable, and lots of efforts were done by the government to reach out to the people who are badly impacted. But when it
Hmm.
comes to the corporate world, I believe that a lot more needs to be done. Of course, as Mr. Ranjan mentioned, there are certain things that are long term. How do we reduce this environment of continuous litigation and disputes and lack of certainty is one part. But given the current environment where each of the corporates have done things to help out their people,
Hmm.
their employees on the cost side because of the treatments, vaccination, I think a little bit more explicit concessions or pronouncements as to how these expenses are to be treated would certainly be most obvious ask at this point in time. So that's one big area. The second is, the continuous burden that is being put on the corporates, particularly newer businesses, on the TDS, TCS. Yes, it serves the government because they are in a sense delegating the responsibility of tax collection to the corporates, but they need to be mindful of the corresponding burden it casts on the companies. And in the environment where you don't have people in offices, people, employees, in a sense, we all know that the great resignation. So a lot of corporates
Hmm.
are, stressed about loss of people. People are moving away from big cities. All that is adding to the burden of doing business, which must be reduced and alleviated in some form or shape.
Hmm. Coming
And
to
we'll have.
you, Mr. Coming to you, Mr. Jain, what can salaried class expect? Is there room for more concessions so that there can be more money in the hands of the people? Because a lot of demands do come in from the salaried class. They do come out in open, especially on social media platforms, and they talk about the budget. They watch this space very closely because it is a direct connect that they feel from the government over here. So, what can people get?
Thank you, Timothy, for inviting me on this program. See, as
Hmm.
you said, what people can expect, what salaried people can expect it. See,
Hmm.
this pandemic in the year 2020 and now 21 and 22 also has made everybody to think about, and the way of life has changed on that purpose. And the tax law has to realign itself with this change scenario of way of life.
Hmm.
Now, the way we work and the way we were working earlier, there's a lot of change. Of people are not working from offices, people are working from homes. And I believe this new technology and this new pandemic, the way it has happened, has
Hmm.
forced people to think about the way how people will are going to work in future also.
Hmm.
Now, keeping this in mind, I believe there has to be some realignment of the exemption deductions which people and particularly salaried people expect.
Hmm.
And one thing which I believe and firmly I am of the opinion is that work from home shifts expenses which are normally incurred in office at the residence of the employee.
That's true. That's
So
true.
my suggestion will be that in case any allowance is given by the employer, because the employee is sitting from home, working from home, incurring expenditure which normally are incurred by the employer when they work in office,
Hmm.
maybe light, electricity, air conditioning, maybe tea, coffee, and internet, all of this, there has to be some concession, some exemption given on that basis to the each of the employees in case the employee is working from home. So that's the one area which I look for.
Hmm.
Second is that what we have learned from this pandemic is that there can be challenge to the life and there can be challenge to the family. And the
That's true.
social security measure need to be reconsidered and reworked out. We have
Hmm.
few of the exemptions available under Section 80C, where we give some concession of life insurance premium, provident fund, something
Hmm.
like the NSC, etc. But this
Hmm.
need to be again re-looked into, particularly keeping in mind the new tax structure which was launched last year only, whereby it was proposed that in case you forego all these exemption and deductions, then you are
Hmm.
entitled for a low tax rebate. I
Hmm.
believe this is something some contradictory on this issue that
Hmm.
as Mr. Akhilesh was saying that there need to be somewhere some concession for the people, for the corporate, etc. That what they want to do in future. Now, everybody cannot get a benefit under the social security scheme sponsored by the government of India because the
mm,
number of people eligible will be too high because a large
mm,
140 crore people. But there are
mm,
6 crore taxpayer in case they want to create their own social security measure by way of contributing to life insurance premium, public provident fund, or like medical insurance, mediclaim, etc. It should be
mm,
encouraged rather than being discouraged by way of introducing a scheme which says that in case you forego this type of exemption, we will have a
mm.
reduced tax rate. So
So
my
you mean that
suggestion would
the new tax regime should have some inclusions in terms of deductions to realign the new regime with those challenges, to noting that these are mandatory expenditures that a taxpayer normally has to go for to secure himself socially?
yes. See, the question is that my new tax structure should encourage that more and
Hmm,
more taxpayer to have their social security scheme. So
hmm,
it is a good idea. I believe whenever these provisions were introduced way back in 1961 ATC and we have it, they have served its purpose because taxpayer expect that when they have a capacity, when they have ability to pay when they're earning, they can contribute to this scheme. But later on in retirement, because they have not been government employees or other employees, so they don't have any social security. So they get back something when they retire out of it. So that security measure should not be discouraged. But that's my suggestion is, and this new tax structure can provide that these type of exemption will continue to be available even if you opt for the new scheme that way. That's my suggestion on that.
hmm. Mr. Ranjan, you also drafted the simplified tax law. We've been seeing that government has adopted some of the suggestions already from the compendium. What else government can bring in which is not much of an outgo but can be a boon to the taxpayer? Like Mr. Jain was pointing out, that a lot of expenditures have now shifted from the company to the employees because of work from home. That's what Mr. Dimri was also looking at, that there are various new challenges that a corporate taxpayer has to align himself with today's challenges. So maybe some sort of suggestions there that you think are readily available for the government.
Yes, of course. In fact, I quite agree with Mr. Jain. I mean, this whole business of having a differential tax regime if you don't claim deductions. Now, this
Hmm.
makes sense to some extent for corporates. Okay, you don't
Hmm.
go for those incentives and exemptions, and you get a lower tax rate. But it doesn't
Hmm.
really make sense for individuals because then you're
Hmm.
asking him to forego investments like insurance and provident fund, which he is doing in any case. Wants to secure his future. So I do
Hmm.
think so there is a complexity in the personal income tax regime which was not necessary. I think it was avoidable when it came in. It
Hmm.
should be simplified. It should not be dealing completely from this question of claiming deductions and incentives, and that would certainly clean up the personal income tax structure. That's the one part of it. Secondly, I would think that and the government at this stage should concentrate and try and build capacities. Um,
Hmm.
there are already some very good signs of growth. For example, the startups in India, they have
Hmm.
been doing extremely well.
Hmm.
Entrepreneurship has to be encouraged. Skill sets have to be improved. If
Hmm.
proper skilling programs are there, people can do that, can get more employment, can earn more money. I think that's where the emphasis should be to create these opportunities for individuals to have better incomes.
Just to point out one thing over here, as we know that every year government get invite suggestions on mygov.gov.in from the citizens, that what would they want as a suggestion to be included in the budget. And what Mr. Ranjan was pointing out, one of the citizens had actually said that in today's time a lot of people are sitting out of job and they want to realign themselves, relearn new skills and old skills, brushing up of old skills, which would require them joining a new course or maybe a new education platform that they need to step in for to get themselves realigned in the system in today's challenges, because maybe a 45-year-old is sitting with what was the education system at that point, and now he's sitting without a job, so he wants to go in for fresh courses, relearn, go back to the school, take some new ideas, and then come back in a new form, getting a new job. So that expenditure that he incurs should be out of tax net, or maybe to be precise, should be exempted. So is that a window that government can give to relearn, to go back and reskill yourself and then come back? So the expenditure made over there, can that be exempted?
Well, it's not a bad idea. I think it can be something that the government may consider. In any which way, this is just one way of doing it, but I think there are several ways in which the government can encourage building up of skill sets in people, and encourage corporates to have more such programs, because they are the ones who can really shore up the capabilities of their employees. I think there are so all steps in that direction, even if it takes a bit of a tax concession on such expenses. I think that's something that the government should be willing to do.
Mr. Dimri, what do you think? Are the windows under ATC and ATD good enough, or can they be reworked to meet today's challenges, especially when it comes to employees? Because you handle a lot of corporates, they do come up with their suggestions as to what employees want.
So, two parts. I think something that needs to be done immediately to recognize the current challenges, the current environment is definitely. Certainly, in the long run, it needs to be seen, because many of these incentives were designed to attract. If a certain amount of deduction is available towards contribution to certain, insurances or other measures of social security, that's in the interest of the long term, well-being of the people, and therefore tax should continue to encourage that rather than impose artificial limits on that, is my point of view. But certainly something must be done for the immediate requirement that we all are witnessing and are not disputing at all. So yes, it will always be this difficult decision that I have certain revenue, should I let go? The revenue should be allowed to let go if it results in a long term welfare measure, which is certainly desirable, as not in doubt at all.
So, what is it something that the government should do?
So
Since you're
whether it
saying
is
something
increasing,
that needs to be done.
whether it is increasing the standard deduction, which has remained static for a very long time, and it has certainly gone past the current requirement, because there's a core philosophy on standard deduction, and that philosophy must remain relevant for the current time, is perhaps one of the least asked. The limits that are imposed for total amount that you will be eligible for deduction, for eligible contribution, whether these are for provident funds, whether that is for insurances or return of or repayment of bank loans for housing. I think those limits are really, really petty, and they really need to be looked at to be relevant in the current time. Because let's go back to the original philosophy. Why were they given to begin with? Because government would want people to own their own houses and things like that. So, in the interest of revenue, we should not compromise things that were great ideas to begin with, and those ideas must remain relevant. And therefore, whether it is standard deduction, which has a core philosophy, whether it is artificial limits that have been imposed, very small limits that have been imposed on certain really necessary contributions that people make out of their income. And third, which is not a new issue, it has been there for a long time. We the we have a progressive system of tax, that more you earn, more you pay tax, and that is well understood and accepted in the context of India. Many other countries have it, but in India, the maximum marginal rate is reached by an individual very quickly. So that progressive system must keep in mind the fact that you want people to enter at a certain tax bracket at a low rate, and as their incomes progress, you keep increasing the rates. So yes, we have the super rich tax, etc., but the maximum marginal rate is reached very, very quickly in India, and this is not a new point. This point has been made time and again, for a long period of time. I think if we are looking at you know being relevant, having the tax policies that are relevant in the current context, I think some of these things need to be re-looked at.
Mr. Dimri, but that's very difficult for the government to be precise. If I talk on your last idea, that we need to realign the tax rates, or maybe the brackets with today's times, the incomes that we have in today's times. So, like a person in the old regime can hit a 30% slab immediately as soon as he crosses the 10 lakh mark. And a 10 lakh rupees per annum of an income in today's time, in terms of the jobs, etc., and the expenditures that one has to take care of, is too less for a 30% tax to be paid. Or maybe to put it in the other way, 10 lakh 30% tax for a 10 lakh rupee per annum income is too high. That's what you're hinting at. And
Yes.
similarly for the super rich class. But don't you think government has already come up with a new regime? They want exemptions to go. Should there be a better mix of old and new regime, clubbed in a way that it is realigned in a better way, noting today's expenditures and noting the incomes that we are actually left with after incurring all our expenditures?
So the policy of reducing exemptions and coming up with a simpler tax system is one part which I'm completely aligned to, and that is part of the big policy, and the government successively has been working towards it. I
Hmm.
completely favor that. Of course, right now we are in the process of a transitioning, and moving from any one system to another does create a little bit of uncertainty. But I assume and I believe that in a matter of time we will be absolutely settled with that. But that's different from the progressive system, because progressive system must be aligned to what we
Hmm.
really believe to be different levels of affluence or different level of income commensurate with the tax. The final point I would make on this point is that it is now globally established that rather than trying to tax at the source at a high level is always counterproductive. We
Hmm.
allow disposable income and tax when they spend the money, which is where the GST is type system is coming in. And we must not forget that India did introduce a massive overhaul of indirect taxes, and therefore, even if you're not taxing at the point of origin, you are
Hmm.
collecting those taxes when the disposable income is spent. And through
Hmm.
all the IT measurements and enforcement measurements, the GST system is getting more and more established. So let's not keep holding back to say, I want to not let go of taxes if we know time and again that we are hearing from that tax-paying class of
Hmm.
all the difficulties that they face. Either we say
Coming
that
to,
those points are not valid. If we
hmm.
accept points, we must find a solution for that.
Coming to you, Mr. Jain, how well do you agree with what Mr. Dimri said? Because we need to see how best things are realigned in today's times.
Timsy, there's 2 points to be noted, I believe.
Hmm.
The collection in the current year,
Hmm.
21-22,
Hmm.
is fairly a good indicator how the tax structure helps in mobilizing the funds.
Hmm.
So corporate rates were reduced from 35% to 25% effective rate, including surcharge.
Hmm.
And then we reduced for manufacturing company rate, effective rate 17% this year.
Hmm.
And one way we say that exemption and deductions are not available. I pause for a minute here. When I say then there are two tax rates for corporate, one is 22% and one is 15% for manufacturing.
Hmm.
Am I not saying that there is exemption and deduction for manufacturing?
Hmm.
There are two ways. One way I say if you do some manufacturing, I will give you a rebate in your income. Or
Hmm.
I say I will give you a lower tax rate. That is also exemption and deduction available given to me. And when these rates were reduced drastically, I believe say yes, from 35% effective to so many percent.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of issue coming up whether the tax collection will improve or what will happen. Now
Hmm.
in this pandemic year, I believe 21-22 was also affected, but still the collections have been very good at that point.
Hmm.
Now that gives an idea that for the purpose of earning more revenue, I need to repose more and more confidence in my taxpayers, the tax base which I am having. And now, for that purpose, as Mr. Dimri rightly said, that the exemption and deduction, there can be two types. One, which are related to your activity, business, etc.
Hmm.
But another exemption and deduction is which is related to you individually as an individual, which is required. And the
Hmm.
second is the area which government wants to promote. Now take a
Hmm.
case of a housing. The government want to promote that everybody should have a own a house. And for
Hmm.
that purpose, there are specific exemptions available. Now, when I say that I will not, I want to withdraw this exemption, what message I'm going to communicate to the society? Please don't own your house, and I will give it to a lower tax rate. Idea is that tax laws have been used not only to have tax collection, of course, which government need revenue for running the government, running the country, but at the same time to give a direction and shape to the society and to the work, the way the life of the work should work on that purpose. So that's why the idea should be that by reducing red rate and retaining certain individual exemption will be a good idea. And Mr. Rajeev Dimri rightly said, when I give a standard deduction, it is not exemption. It is neither a deduction. It is a cost which an employee incurs while discharging its duties. Since it is difficult to measure, a threshold has been kept, like take 50,000 rupees and improve it upon by cost inflation index. See, like it was 50,000 3 years back. Now I say increase 50% to 75,000 rupees similarly. Now, second point is this pandemic has also told us that what can happen to the life, what can happen to the society. Now, in that scenario, we need to come out with a scheme that how does an individual secure itself if something goes wrong with the family, with himself, or within and the medical issues which come up. Now, there has to be some more exemption and deductions available, because it is not only the tax, it is also the way the society has to be structured and how it has to be more secure the society has to be made out. So that has to be taken into consideration. And third point, which is maybe not directly connected, is the interest rates also. You see, over a period, the interest rate has gone down drastically. We were having a regime where the tax rate was 12%, 15% plus. Now we all know that FDRs are having 4 to 5% rate of return. Income of the people, senior citizen, etc., has also gone down. Income of the taxpayer who are making investment, that has also gone down drastically. If that be so, the tax laws also need to reconsider the interest rate under the tax laws. Now we are continuing with 12% rate, 1% per month, we say for everything, because the interest is a compensation for the delayed payment or whatever it is. It's not a penalty, penal provision or separate provisions for that purpose, because that also affects. Similarly, we are having certain exemption and deduction available in respect of interest income which we are having from bank deposit, etc. Those also need to be realigned, keeping in the new tax rates or to new interest rate that way also. So you see, exercise. And India, I think in India, we have been using this every annual budget exercise as a part of making various amendment and the policy, tax policies also. So somewhere in case we are considering it, and this year 21-22 is one of the best years so far collections are concerned. So some bold measures can be taken now on this to give a new shape and new realignment, considering the lessons which we have learned in the last 2 years.
Coming to you, Mr. Ranjan, since we come to a close to this session, what are the 5 key areas that government can rework and give a benefit to the taxpayer, where it will not hurt the government in terms of the fiscal space or the tax collections that much?
Well, I think some of them have been already been mentioned.
They should consider from you.
No, well, as I said, I don't think the government will do anything about the rate structure. I do wish that they do simplify the structure. It's a bit complicated at the moment for personal income tax. It would be better to have a simpler with a lesser number of slabs, because the more slabs you have, the more problems of bracket creep and other issues that keep arising. But then overall, I don't think there'll be much of a change in the rate structure. I do wish, and I think that should be done, that the salaried class is really under a lot of pressure. And I think it's time. I think Mr. Dimri had mentioned that the standard deduction has not been changed for a long time. It is actually something which should be looked at and should be increased. I also think that, as I said, some ways of encouraging industry or the small and medium sector which can increase employability, and that's something that for ways that we found. We encourage startups. There are a number of issues that startups are facing, the taxation of ESOPs, etc. I think those are the areas which should be clarified so that there is a more of tax serenity for them and they can grow. And largely to do with the procedure and the compliance, the technology that is being used. I think that has to be ensure that it really works and really works to the best expectations of the taxpayer. These are I think broadly the main areas where I think we should focus on. And there are incentives available for savings and for insurance and for health benefits. I think perhaps we can review those incentives, deductions under 80D, etc. But I think the overall, broadly, I think it's more a question of increasing the employability, increasing the potential to earn income, which should be concentrated on.
Coming to you, Mr. Dimri, what will be your top 5 suggestions that government should consider, which will not hurt the government's revenues also, and can actually be a boon for the taxpayers?
So I agree with the points the Ranjan have made on the personal taxes. So I will not talk about those. But from the corporate, I think if there is one major wish that I have is to bring in more certainty in the tax system, which is a long-standing ask of the corporates. So some kind of permanent dispute resolution mechanism. I think the government in the recent past has done some fabulous things in trying to bring down the level of disputes by these settlement schemes that have come about. But those were in one-time interventions. If we can find a permanent body for certain kind of dispute resolutions, particularly when it comes to valuation type disputes, courts are designed to interpret laws. Courts are not designed to evaluate things and those kind of matters. So some kind of permanent dispute resolution mechanism, and this constantly new taxes coming in. I mean, to take the example of equalization levy, it is a tax for a very temporary purpose. I think it has been completely misapplied. It has been defined and expanded in a way that it makes absolute no sense. It has a very short life, but the disputes about this tax will remain for next 20 years is my personal fear. So things like these, what I would consider misadventures, we really have to move away from, because we have to create an environment for industries to plan and grow. There are anyway enough and more uncertainties, things like pandemic and all, which is of course in nobody's control. There is enough uncertainty in a business world. Let's not create tax and regulatory environment which adds to it. That would be my biggest ask, in terms of the budget, and that has to come from the government.
Hmm. Coming to you, Mr. Jain, what would be your key suggestions, especially for individuals? Because that's where you excel in your suggestions.
See, Tim, I have been of the firm belief that in case you restructure, you give more exemption reduction, your revenue is not going to be affected. Sometime it on paper it may look like that if I increase the standard deduction, I do this, there may be some challenge, the revenue may fall. Maybe in a short period I can consider, but in the longer term it never affects the revenue. On the contrary, it improves. So my suggestions will be: one, the new tax regime, the new tax structure should be merged with the existing old tax structures, and with the all exemption deductions which are personal and which are related to your social security and medical like type, something like this. One. Second is, as I said in the beginning itself, when an employee is working and this is going to be the way of life, some more exemption should be allowed. And in case any employer gives any allowance to an employee for working from home, a particular amount, say per month or a year, will be exempt in the hands of the employee because he is meeting that expenditure, may be subject to certain condition to avoid misuse on that part. Thirdly, a special deduction available for taking insurance or medical insurance, whatever it is, or long-term insurance, whatever it is, for meeting the eventuality like what we have with this pandemic, corona type parts also. So these few measures will improve, I believe, the working condition. It will improve the social security, and at the same time, I'm of the firm belief that it will not hit the revenue also.
So a work from home allowance should be tax free. Reskilling expenditures should be tax free or tax exempt. And not to forget, some new exemptions for startups and for MSMEs for creating employment. And yes, lots and lots of simplification, easing the burden on compliance. That's what I feel are the major concerns, or the areas which all three of our experts have actually talked about, and they do look like some of the areas that cannot be too much of a burden on government revenues, but yes, they can ease the burden for the taxpayers, be it the corporate or the salaried class or the individuals. Well, that's it for this time. Whether these expectations actually make up in the budget speech, or will these continue to be just good ideas for the taxman to consider at a later stage, only time will tell. Many thanks, Mr. Ranjan, Mr. Dimri, and Mr. Jain for joining us. Stay tuned. There's a lot more coming up on the other side.
Thank you.
Thank you, Timsi.